That's something you'll never take, no debate. It's gotta be in you to endure the hate and elevate. If I love you, then we gon' eat, even if we share the plate. Strive for greatness and try to be more like Harris Bank, youngest Zach. Whoever at the top, we coming next. Don't care what it is, we conquer all with no regrets. It's no wonder when we come on your set, they show respect. I don't overstep, we taking off like Boeing jets. You know the rep, and if you don't, you better ask about me. I done made it to that skyline, I seen out of Abla housing. Got goals and accomplishments, the new chick I got arousing. She say she don't drink it yet, every cup I pour she downing. Maybe cause she think I'm scouting every season, cuffing season. I won't do you dirty unless you take me to the cleaners. I'll be sure to show each and every reason before I leave you, guaranteed to make you rethink your actions and start believing I got. That's something no one can break. I'm someone no one knows.
Hello, this is Dr. Malik Rahim, clinical assistant professor at Wilberforce University. And today I want to talk about Black men and Black masculinity and the mental health issues that Black men face. And before I really get started, I wanted to say welcome to the video podcast. I want to encourage you to hit the like button if you like the content that you see, and also hit the bell for notifications for future tapings. Audre Lorde, and I'm going to paraphrase here because I can't remember the exact quote verbatim, but the quote I'm thinking of is that for Black women, and I'm include as well as Black men, it is imperative that we do not that if we don't define ourselves for ourselves, we'll be defined by others for their use and our detriment. And I want to use that quote as I discuss Black masculinity. And when you look at Black masculinity historically and through the media, I'll say Black masculinity has been defined over 3 overarching categories. And those categories are perception, expectation, and representation. And I'm going to kind of go over all 3 of these. And these categories are intertwined together to create an extended definition of Black masculinity. This type of masculinity is extremely different. Black masculinity is extremely different from any other's race or culture definition of masculinity because there is such a negative connotation against and attached to Black men. And that's part of the perception. So when you look at Black men and the way we've been represented in the media has immediate impact on the psychological development and the self-efficacy of the masculine man or the Black male, right? So give you a perfect example. I remember a few years ago, there was this magazine cover where it had LeBron James and I can't remember, and it had LeBron James bouncing a basketball, and he was taking the same pose as the infamous picture of the advertisement for the original movie of King Kong. And the message, the subconscious message that was being brought there was the Black man's threat toward the white woman. And that was played out in the original movie, The Birth of the Nation. Because in The Birth of the Nation, it was shown how the Black male was this fearful, hypersexual, violent being that was a threat to the purity of white women. And it was up to the organization of the Klan to protect white society, but especially white women, from these Black men, these Black groups that was going to come out and try to intentionally rape white women. And that's the subconscious message that picture of LeBron James kind of did, right? Now I'm not blaming LeBron James, but it's like when you look at the picture, is you'll see a lot of similarities of the original, advertisement and photograph of King Kong. So it's like that narrative of the black man being dangerous, being scary, being a hypersexual and a threat to white women, especially, has always been underlying in our history as long as we've been in the West, right? So those type of things have a psychological impact on black men, especially when it comes to how you're perceived. You go into a bank and you're automatically looked at as a threat. When you go into an elevator and women clutch their purse or back away, right? So you find that, sometimes unconsciously as black men, you'll do everything you can to try to make yourself as non-threatening as possible to the individuals that are around you. So you don't want them to feel threatened. Another issue is that in a lot of the environment that a lot of the black men are in, is that hyper masculinity is a very important thing. And hypermasculinity is the exaggeration of masculinity characteristics by either physical or emotional toughness, aggressiveness, and an emphasis on wealth, right? And I would also include in there hypersexuality. And when you look at how black men behave in a lot of urban areas, it is, an unwritten law that you have to behave a certain way. And if you don't behave that certain way, then you're going to be looked at and looked down upon as far as like prey. So you have to be physical. You have to be emotionally tough. You have to be aggressive or even appear aggressive among your peers. Okay. And when you look at the way where we express ourselves, is usually an emphasis on wealth, is also an emphasis on materialism. Okay. And so it's like when you're coping with threats of your safety in these neighborhoods with elevated crime, poverty, and violence, over time, this becomes part of your identity, this hyper masculinity. For black men, especially adolescents, it's this toughness in the inner city, the urban inner cities, is perceived as a survival. Okay. But the way we're portrayed in the media is also psychologically kind of telling. There was this show that used to come on, I believe on BT, and I used to watch this show because I thought it was I thought it was very well done. Usually when I watch a show, I want to watch the show to pick up what kind of hidden messages I can get, so I can use sometimes as a learning tool for my classes. So that way it's easier for me to be able to show examples. But the show name was Being Mary Jane. And the character Mary Jane Paul, was played by the beautiful young actress Gabrielle Union, right? And I like a lot of the roles she played, and I like this role as well. And this particular episode, and I don't want to digress on why I liked it, but I liked it because it was a black female perspective on the world. So it's like whenever I'm showing my class, I like to show that because I like to show it as a black female perspective on the world. And this particular episode that I'm thinking of, Mary Jane was like being pursued by a gentleman, a new potential boyfriend. I can't really remember if he actually became her boyfriend or he was a potential boyfriend, but that's kind of, not here or there for the conversation. But in the episode, she was having a conversation, and what she was trying to explain to her friend that she's used to a man with more what they call swagger, right? And the way swagger is usually defined is to be able to move with confidence, sophistication, a sense of coolness, um, throughout wherever they go. And because she didn't feel he had this, she felt that the swagger, in her definition, she felt that he was too what they call metrosexual for her liking. So it's like you got to look at the whole concept of masculinity, black masculinity being on a spectrum. So it's like if you looked at it, it's like the closer you get to metrosexual, the way she was explaining it, the way I interpreted it, is you're getting closer to mainstream culture, white culture. But when you're getting closer to the concept of having swagger, that's when you have more black masculinity in you, and you have more black culture and dynamics with it. So it's like that's the way I picked it up, and so it's like she went on to kind of give examples on what she meant about you're not you don't have enough masculinity, enough swagger about you because, the way he was sitting, she told him the way you sit, you sitting with your legs crossed. Black men don't sit like that. They sit with their legs apart because they want their, junk to be able to breathe hot air. They have a sense of assertiveness and strength, and that he didn't have that. Okay, so that is one example. I told you another example is a couple of years ago, LeBron James, a great basketball player, had a photo op on a magazine cover. I want to say it was Vogue magazine. I could be wrong, but he took a photo op, and what he was posing, and he was bouncing a basketball, and he had his mouth open, and he looked, somewhat. They made him to where he looked somewhat aggressive, right? So the subliminal message that could be taken from that is the aggressiveness, the domineering, hyper-violent, hypersexual black male that's a danger to the white female, right? And so that narrative has been going on for an extremely long time, since the first enslaved Africans were brought here. The subconscious psychological fear of white culture was that black men was going to rape black women. As a matter of fact, the original movie, Birth of a Nation, was his theme. And that's why they said, the great heroes of the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan was given that. That's why, that's what the movie stated. So the thing is like those psychological things that, have an impact. So like it's a cause a psychological cost to be a black male. Being the fact that you have to, psychologically make others feel comfortable with your masculinity, your black masculinity, is weighs a psychological toll. Race-based trauma has a psychological toll. So the thing is that with black masculinity, with the way it's being, taught as far as defining in our community, is that you have a lot of strength, and you don't have a lot of communications about your emotions. And that building up with that is like you have a lot of psychological stressors. So black men are prone to not only the physical ailments, but also the psychological and psychosocial ailments. So you have black men who are dealing with a lot of trauma, a lot of grief, a lot of emotions, a lot of racial microaggressions, a lot of racial battle fatigue. And they sometimes act out violently in interpersonal relationships, or they act out violently among each other. You have black men that are suffering from things like depression, mood swings, bipolar, anxiety issues. So the thing is that it's very, very imperative that black men seek out counseling. Now, the thing is that unfortunately, there are not a lot of black male counselors like myself. So I really encourage anyone who's thinking about getting into the mental health field, any brothers who are thinking about getting into the mental health field, to really seriously reach out and get into a program that's culturally sensitive, to where you could be able to give help to brothers who need counselors, who have cultural humility, who be able to understand the culture and understand the dynamic of black masculinity. And not saying that women can't do it, but it's very, very important that we have, not only black women, but black men come into the fold of counseling, the mental health field of clinical mental health, clinical rehabilitation, social work, psychology, and for us to build on that and to address some of the psychosocial issues that black men go through as we develop and go through our, ever changing of trying to find out who we truly are, especially when it comes to black masculinity. So that would conclude my discussion on black masculinity. I look forward to having more discussions on this and other topics. If, like I said, hit the like button and also hit the bell so you can have notifications of future podcasts. Hopefully, I'm planning on having one every week, and that way you'll be able to know and subscribe to the channel. So thank you. Peace and blessings. Assalamu alaikum.